Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our Bible study. We're taking a look at Ecclesiastes chapter 8 today. I have had my afternoon affogato, and so I'm ready to go. If you don't know what affogato is, it's pretty good. It's a scoop of ice cream and then a shot of espresso poured over top. And I think it's an Italian thing. I never had one until I came to Albania, where I am now, but it's pretty good. It's worth trying. You have to have the right ratio between the espresso and the ice cream, though, for it to be perfect. So you can discover that on your own. But I am caffeinated up and I'm ready to go. Let's talk about Ecclesiastes 8. As we've been talking about for especially 7 and 8, we're talking about characteristics of a wise man. Solomon has told us that there is still some value in having wisdom on the earth. It does bring some advantages, even though life on earth is vain from the perspective that he's writing from. Being a wise man still is it has its advantages. So he's been kind of describing that wise man, some of his characteristics, some of the things that he knows in this last chapter, chapter 7, and we're going to read about that more in chapter 8. Let's go ahead and take a look at our second page, and our first section on that page is verses 1 through 9. This chapter is a little bit shorter than yesterday's, so we've just got 2 sections, but verses 1 through 9, what the wise man knows. So this is Solomon describing that man. It's interesting. The first thing he says is actually something about his appearance. He says that a wise man can be recognized by his face. His face is changed, and it's distinct from that of a fool's face. Maybe that's because, a fool gives away all his emotions and his thoughts through the expression of his face. A wise man knows to be a little bit more guarded. He says that a wise man obeys his king. Honoring the king was honoring God. The man of wisdom behaves with prudence when he stands before the king, and he doesn't ally himself with those who are involved in evil schemes. He knows better than that. A wise man knows that there's a proper time and a right way to do everything. He doesn't act with impulse or just purely on emotion. His actions are not hasty, but wisely timed. The wise man also knows the inevitability and unpredictability of death. He knows that he's not going to escape it, and he knows that there is no power, neither good or evil, that will prevent it from happening. Now let's take a look at section number 2, verses 10 through 17, God's mysterious ways. Solomon knew of wicked men who were praised during their lifetimes, and they were buried with honor because their evil deeds were never exposed to the public. And he talks about how this is another one of those vanities of the earth. Evil people get away with stuff, and sometimes they die, and no one even knows what they were up to. Solomon bemoaned that, quote, the sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily. A lot of times, people do evil things, and sometimes it's decades before they get justice. Sometimes they never get justice or punished for what they've done. Men don't always get punished in a timely way, and this delay in judgment teaches other men and trains other men that they can do evil things, and maybe they'll get away with it as well. Another thing that frustrated Solomon was that sometimes the things that wicked men deserved happened to the righteous, and the things that righteous men deserved happened to the wicked. How is that fair? Why has God created a world like this where this seems to happen? He's going to talk about that in a second. So Solomon doesn't know how to explain this. He doesn't know how to make sense of it. But he did express his confidence, interestingly, that those who follow God's laws will be taken care of and will be better off. He concludes at the end of the chapter that even the wisest man on earth can't figure out the way that God works. Why does the world work this way? Job was just asking that question. We just looked at the book of Job. He was just asking those questions like, why is it this way? Solomon's kind of baffled by the same thing. He says the wisest men on earth don't know. If a man claims to know, he doesn't actually know. So a man can spend his whole life, but he cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. Verse 17. Okay, so what about our application for today? I think this one maybe is a little bit heavier, theologically heavier than most of the applications that we've looked at in this book so far, but I think it's definitely something that you can handle. Here's something to consider when you ask the question, or when maybe you observe sometime in the world where an evil person seems to be getting all the blessings, and you're wondering how that works and why God would allow that to happen. Sometimes God allows people to enjoy blessings so that he can elevate them high enough so that it hurts when he humbles them. And you might say, well, where do you get this from? Well, I can think of two prime examples of this in the biblical text. Number one would be Pharaoh back in the book of Exodus, and the other one is Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel. You may or may not know about him. We haven't covered Daniel, not yet, at least. Both of these men enjoyed lavish blessings. They were both kings of essentially the most powerful nations in the world during their day. So they had, whatever, anything that they wanted. But they were given those blessings so that the world could learn from their downfalls. And at least in Nebuchadnezzar's case, he could learn from his own downfall. Pharaoh and all of Egypt were humbled by God for their resistance to God's commands and for their oppression of God's people, the Israelites. Nebuchadnezzar, if you know his story in Daniel chapter 4, he went from being the king of the world to eating grass like an animal outside of his own palace. So what can we learn from this? I think first of all, we can learn that just because someone is getting physical blessings, seems to be obtaining a lot of things, that's not always a good thing. That can be a warning, and it can be a warning in this way. Be warned when you walk away from God and your physical blessings start to increase. It isn't a sign that God has forgotten about your rebellion. God never forgets about sin and people who walk away from him willingly. It may be a sign he is lifting you up so that you'll feel the sting of his discipline to a greater degree when he finally chooses to topple you from your pedestal of pride. The examples of Nebuchadnezzar and Pharaoh aren't in the Bible for no reason. They're in there so that we can learn about the nature of God, learn about the way that God works, learn about the way that he humbles proud people. So if you're in a situation where you've walked away from God and you're thinking, oh, well, everything seems to be going okay, and actually I'm doing financially better than I was before, be warned that this is one of the ways that God works. And for those of you who are trying to walk with God, and maybe you're looking at somebody else and you're being like, well, why they get all this stuff and I don't? Just remember, that's not always a good thing. And God indeed does work in mysterious ways.